Hello and welcome. My name is Matasha Allen, and I am your lesson reviewer for this week's Sunday school lesson. I would like to thank Evangelist Waynell Henson, that Sunday school girl, for the opportunity to come and share with you today. Now, who is ready for Sunday school? Our lesson title this week is An Eternal Kingdom. Our Bible basis is 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 4 through 16. Our Bible truth: be sure your plans are from the Lord. Our memory verse comes from 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 16, and it reads, "And thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee." Our lesson aim: by the end of the lesson, we will recognize the significance of making God a major part of planning and inheritance for our descendants, feel the need to keep trusting God even when He denies our requests, and decide to seek God's heart and be in His presence. Now, in this week's lesson, we have a cast of characters, short cast of characters. Our three characters that are mentioned are the king, the prophet, and the Lord. So the king is King David, who was the second king of Israel. Then we have Nathan the prophet, and Nathan was King David's court prophet and advisor. And one thing about Nathan, based on what I've read about him, he seems to be a person who was bold and brave and willing to speak the truth, even if it wasn't popular. And then we have the Lord. And so there's this discussion that goes on in this week's lesson, where King David expresses a desire to build God a house. And he talks to Nathan, and God talks to Nathan and gives Nathan a message to give to David about his desire to build God a house. And we're going to get into that in today's review.
Hello to every one of you. Hello, TSSG family. Hello, TSSG family. You're in the TSSG space. Well, hello, TSSG family.
Sunday school. Changing the way you see Sunday school with that Sunday school girl.
In this week's lesson, one of the things that God told Nathan to tell David had to do with what was going to happen after David died. And sometimes we don't want to talk about end of life things. Sometimes they can be uncomfortable for us. But in this week's lesson, we find that, those difficult conversations are sometimes necessary. And another thing that came to mind as I was looking at this lesson is the question of, how do we want to be remembered by those who knew us and loved us? And we see King David, and a lot of people know King David as a man after God's own heart. And when we look at ourselves, it's a great opportunity to look inward and ask ourselves, how do we want our loved ones to remember us after we're gone? What have we left them? Or what spiritual virtues can we prepare to leave them? Because oftentimes when it comes to an inheritance, a lot of times people think of material wealth, but we can also leave things such as virtues to the next generation. And that's whether you have children or not. I don't have children, but I have nieces and nephews. I have people that I've mentored. And those are the people that I want to leave something behind for, something more valuable than financial wealth. And another person I can think of who left behind sort of virtues for the future generation is Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. I read about Dr. Bethune as a young child in elementary school. I read several books about her. I had her picture up on my wall. She was one of the people I looked up to, and I believe that learning about her at a young age is what influenced me to go into education as a career. Dr. Bethune, if you're not familiar with her, was the founder of what is now Bethune-Cookman University, and she was a woman of faith. And I was reading her last will and testament, which is on the university's website. And the things that she mentions in her will, she leaves behind things such as love and dignity and faith. And in the end of her will, she says, if I have a legacy to leave my people, it is my philosophy of living and serving. As I face tomorrow, I am content, for I think I have spent my life well. And that's something to pause and think about. And ask yourself the question, what are we leaving? What are we leaving behind for the next generation? What virtues are we modeling for them? And so that's something to sort of pause and think about. Those of you who are teachers, you may want to have a discussion with your class about how do you want to be remembered, or what do you want to leave behind for the next generation. And so God has this conversation with David, and he talks about what's going to happen after David's gone. And although David wanted to build God a house, God had other plans. David wanted to build a house, but God wanted to build a kingdom through David's descendants. And so when it comes to plans and aspirations that you may have, you may want to ask yourself, are these plans me-sized plans, or are they kingdom-sized plans? And another thing that David had to deal with is being able to trust God, even though God had other plans. David wanted to build God a house, and God tells him, your son's going to build the house. And for some of us, it's an opportunity to really look at how do we respond when the answer is no. We live in a day and time where there are some people who have an aversion to being told no. There's some people that have an issue with limits being set, or being told that they can't do something that they want to do. I work with young children, and oftentimes young children struggle with, as they're learning structure and routine, sometimes they struggle with when an adult has to set a limit. And when we look at, how do we respond when God says no, we should really examine ourselves to make sure that our response isn't like the toddler who doesn't get their way. What would have happened if David said, I want to build God a house, and God's telling him, no, your son's going to build a house, and David threw a tantrum. Imagine David throwing a tantrum like, I'm going to build it anyway. You never give me what I want. You're ruining my life. But David didn't do all that. David continued to trust God. And sometimes that no is the best answer for us. Proverbs 3 verse 5 tells us, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not into thine own understanding. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves that God's understanding is greater than our understanding. We may have a good idea, but it might not be a God idea. I'll say that again. We might have a good idea, but it might not be a God idea. It might not be an idea that is in God's will at that time for our lives. Doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the idea, it's just not in God's will. And during those times, we have to remember that when we're serving God, that it's not about what we want, but it's about God's will. It's sort of like if you go to a restaurant and you place an order and you tell the server what you would like. The server may not like the food that you ordered, but it's not the server's job to fix you what they want. It's the server's job to bring you your order. When God gives us an assignment, when God gives us expectations, it's not up to us to say, "Well, I don't want to do this." You know, God, God God might be placing it on your heart to spend more time in prayer, or God may be placing it on your heart to devote more time to fasting, or to devote more time to serving in your local church, or to devote more time to witnessing, or to devote more time to being active in the community. And it's not about what you want at that time. It's about being obedient to God's will. So when when David gets the word from God, we don't read anywhere where David threw a tantrum. He may have been disappointed, but we don't read where David got mad and said, "I'm not talking to God ever again." But David continued to trust God, even though God's plans were different than what David had in mind. And we have to remember that our tantrums don't change God's decision anyway. And again, kudos to Nathan for having the courage and the boldness to tell David the truth. Because I mean, this is the king we're talking about. You know, what if David had gotten mad at Nathan for delivering this message that he may not have necessarily wanted to hear? Where are the Nathans in the world today? Are you one? Do you have a Nathan in your life? And this is a call out that I noticed as I was reading the lesson, was just the importance of not surrounding yourself with yes people all the time. Don't surround yourself with people that are only going to tell you what you want to hear. You need everybody needs a Nathan on their team. Every church needs a Nathan. Your circle of friends needs a Nathan. A Nathan is somebody who hears from God and hears clearly from God, and is willing to relay what thus saith the Lord, even when it's not popular. So type in the comments for me, who is your Nathan? We need to hear from the Nathans in the world right now. And David was able to accept God's redirection and instruction. And that's something that we can apply to our lives when we have a plan, when we have an idea and our request is denied, or God lets us know that he's going a different route than what we anticipated. We have to be willing to accept God's redirection and go in the direction that he's going. And here's why. Because ultimately, God's will is what I want for my life. And if there's something that I want that is not in God's will, then it's better for me not to have it. There was a song I remember singing in the choir. God's will is what I want for my life. I was singing that earlier today, and that is something that has stuck with me. And I have to remind myself of that at times, because let's be honest, sometimes we ask God for things and we're excited about it and we're believing for it and we just know it's going to happen. And sometimes God's answer is different than what we expected. And we might be disappointed about it, but in the end, we we continue to serve God and we continue to submit to the will of God. And so we have to ask ourselves, are you willing to lay aside your wants to pursue what God wants? And that can be a tough one, because sometimes we can want things so badly. We might, we may want to live in a particular city, but God may be calling you to another area. Or we may want to serve in a particular ministry, but God may want you to serve in a different ministry. Some of us may want to be married, and in this season in our life, that's not God's will for us. But are you willing to set aside your wants for what God wants for you? And remember, the blessings of the Lord maketh rich, and he adds no sorrow. So whatever it is that God has in mind for us, we have to remember it's going to be what's best for us. And when you get into the message that God gave to Nathan to give to David, he reminds David of where God brought him from. God reminds him, I brought you out of the sheepfold and made you the king. And that reminds me of the question of, where were you when you encountered God's presence for the first time? And what was that like? And how has your life been changed for the better since encountering God? And those are some things you could think about. You may even be able to discuss them with your Sunday school class. But never forget that initial moment, that experience, that initial experience of encountering God for the first time and what that was like. We want to preserve that joy and that anticipation throughout our walk with God. And one way we can do that is to be intentional about spending time with God on a regular basis. We can get so busy in life, but it's very important to not become too busy for the Lord. We want to be intentional about setting aside time to spend with the Lord on a daily basis. Some people call it quiet time or devotionals or whatever you call it. You want to be sure that it's meaningful and you want to be consistent with it. I called it quiet time because that's what it was introduced to me as. And during quiet time, I try to minimize the distractions and strive to create a welcoming environment for God's presence. And quiet time may look different for different people, depending on what your life is like. Of course, somebody who lives by themselves their quiet time may look a little bit different than someone who lives in a house with a lot of other people. But however your quiet time looks, you want it to be meaningful and you want it to be consistent. So some things that I would recommend doing when you're setting aside time to be with God is to pick out a quiet place, whether it's at a desk, whether it's in your bedroom, whether it's your breakfast table. For 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 me, sometimes if I'm commuting to work, sometimes I'll take that time on my commute to spend time with God. Or for some people, if you're spending time with God on your lunch break, there may be a quiet place in your workplace, a quiet area in your workplace, or a park, or you can get creative, but just a quiet place where there's not a lot of distractions, where you can spend some meaningful time with God. And one way to minimize distractions is I was taught to create a mind sweeper list. And you may say, well, what's that? Well, a mind sweeper list is when you write down the things that you have to do. And you do that so that as you begin your quiet time, those thoughts aren't interrupting you and distracting you. You're in the middle of praying and all of a sudden you remember, oh, I got to take the trash out, or I need to go to the bank today, or I need to do this. So you sweep all that out of your mind before you begin your devotion time, so that it's less likely to interrupt you. And then another thing to do is during this time with God, however it looks for you. Some people, it's very important for them to do it early in the morning. They cite that verse, "Early will I seek thee." And yes, there are benefits to seeking God first thing in the morning. But if you're not a morning person, or if you, or if your schedule is such that first thing in the morning is not a good time for you to do a full devotional, maybe you do your prayer first thing in the morning and you do other parts of your devotional at a different part of the day. Don't beat yourself up if you're not able to do quiet time consistently first thing in the morning, if that's not something you're conditioned to do. It takes time to, build these routines into your schedule and make them a habit. But most importantly, however you decide to spend time with God, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's on your lunch break, whether it's at a different part of the day, be intentional and be consistent. And as you make time for God, start to document, your experiences, and document how productive the time is. And that's another thing. Focus on quality versus quantity. I have people who ask me sometimes, well, how many minutes do you spend preparing your Sunday school lesson? Or how many minutes do you spend with God? And honestly, when I go to pray, I'm not standing there looking at my watch or looking at my phone. I'm, focused on the quality of the time as opposed to the quantity. And so when it comes to spending time with God, I encourage you to focus more on the quality of the experience you have with God and less on the quantity. And I'm going to wrap everything up really quickly. We have David, the king, the man after God's own heart. And he desired to build God a house. He's sort of expressing his gratitude for God by desiring to do something for God. And God lets him know that his descendants are not only going to build God a house, but God promises that his descendants will reign on the throne forever. And that is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, because David was an ancestor of Jesus. And one of the prophecies about Jesus was that of his kingdom there shall be no end. And what an honor it was for King David to be part of Jesus's bloodline. And to know that after he was gone, that his descendants would continue to reign and rule as kings forever. And it all started with, David's connection to God. And so it shows the importance of how the decisions that we make can impact future generations. So I encourage you to keep that in mind as you go through your week and as you get into this week's lesson, to look at the ways that we can make choices today that impact future generations for the better. Have a blessed week.
Thank you so much for sharing in this space with us today. If this ministry has blessed you in any way, I invite you to consider sharing a small gift of just $3 with us. You can do so by scanning one of the QR codes on the screen. And please don't forget, we are waiting for you to join us over in the TSSG Connect. You can see all the benefits here on the screen, and we look forward to serving you in a more personal way.
Have you had an opportunity to visit our amazing swag shop? Stop by and check out great items for Sunday school and church school. This includes t-shirts, pouches, mugs, and so much more. Find something that you'll enjoy or something for your favorite teacher.
Changing the way you see Sunday school with that Sunday school.